Welcome back, everybody. I've been really on a kick of Sabaton lately, so I actually listen to it every day going to work. I decided we've been doing really more of the modern stuff they do, but they are from Sweden, so they are a Swedish band. And one of their most popular albums is actually called Carolus Rex. Now, for those of you that don't know what that means, Carolus Rex is actually Latin for Charles's reign, and that's going to be the gentleman behind me here with all the blue ornaments. He's actually Charles XII, the King of Sweden, better known as Carolus Rex. So he is probably one of the most known individuals in the history of Sweden. He was a boy king. He seized power. I'll one day do a reaction to their song, Carolus Rex, which is actually about him completely. But today I decided, with everything going on in the world, especially in the East, to talk about pretty much what made Russia a great power. And that's why I have this guy behind me as well. That's Peter the Great. And what we're going to be discussing today is the song from Sabaton, Poltava. Now, Poltava was one of many battles during a conflict called the Great Northern War. Now, there was a time in Europe, and a lot of us, I'm going to assume many of you are aware of this time, but also a lot of you probably aren't. A lot of people don't realize that Sweden was once one of the great superpowers of Europe. The Swedish Empire was large. It stretched all the way to northern Russia, all the way out to countries like Iceland and Denmark. The Vikings pretty much founded Sweden and created the country. And then you had nations like Denmark and Poland, Lithuania and Russia, and even Prussia, who saw the rising power of Sweden as a threat. A Scandinavian country controlling the North Sea was a big threat to countries like Russia, who only had the cold water ports. Like, yes, they had the Crimea and stuff, but even then, they needed to control the ports they did have. Even a country like Prussia, at this point in history, Prussia, is not as powerful as they are later on. This is in 1709. This is really early on that Charles and Peter are king and emperor of Russia. Peter the Great is actually considered the great modernizer. Before he became Tsar, he traveled the world. He actually worked on a British merchant ship. He wanted to learn about the Western powers, and because he grew up in this Eastern Russian society, big beards, very pious to the Eastern Orthodox Russian Church, things like that. So he went out and he learned about the rest of the world, and he was fascinated by it. So he started this modernization of Russia to make them a Western European power as well, which he did a very good job doing. But what ended up happening was Charles XII, the gentleman over here, as I said before, he wanted more. He wanted Sweden, he wanted to prove himself, and he became a warrior king. He wanted to spread his influence. He wanted to win battles, win glory, become remembered as one of Sweden's great kings. And Poltava is going to be his climax, because he will live for a few more years after Poltava, but Poltava will be what ends the Swedish control. I'll do a series on the Great Northern War, because it is one of the most important wars in world history, but Poltava is going to bring an end to the Swedish control and hegemony of Europe, and that's what this video is on. So if you're new to the channel, I invite you to subscribe. I've been on a kick of these Sabaton videos, but also if you're returning, please like, share, and comment. And tell me what Sabaton song you like, and maybe I'll do a review of that as well. This is a great song, and I'm going to be using clips from a movie about Poltava. I gotta say, the European film companies are really beating the United States film companies. They're making these awesome war movies, The United States, we have to get Hollywood. You got to get your game up because some of these war movies are fantastic. But this is Poltava by Sabaton. All right, friends. So as I said, this is from a film about the Battle of Poltava. I'll put the link to I'll put the name and the link and everything, in the end. Again, I don't own any of these. I don't own the song. I don't own the video. I don't own anything. I'm just reviewing it. I like to pick these because they're more visual and you can see what's actually going on, and they're a little more fun. Also, everything goes back to Sabaton because it's their music. It's everything with them. But just to get us started, we're looking here. The Swedish army had about 30,000 men, and the Russian had about 75,000 men. The battle took place on July 8th. A little background. So what happened was the Swedish had actually invaded Russia, because what happened was Russia, Poland, and Denmark together to fight Sweden. Now, Sweden took out Denmark and Poland, but Russia was still a big threat. So they began to invade Russia in response. And after somewhat of a wild goose chase, Charles XII had actually cornered Peter the Great, but that's not exactly what happened. Peter the Great had set up somewhat of a very ingenious position to hold off, and on July 8th, 1709, they met at Poltava. Let's watch. It's Charles XII. Also, just so you know, before we go in, the uniforms, these are what you would call Caroleans. This was like the professional army. This was like, because again, you have to think of this era in Europe. There really weren't professional armies. England is one of the first countries to actually have a professional army. It's called the regular army. It's created by Oliver Cromwell and Sir Thomas Fairfax. Or was it Lord whatever, Thomas Fairfax. That's why when you hear people refer to British armed forces, you have the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force, but it's the British Army, because the British Army is the only organization not created by the monarchy. So the Caroleans was the first, I would say, elite professional army. Back to the song. So, just there, they were mentioning, there's nothing to be found, no supplies or anything. This is because the Russians were conducting what we know as scorched earth. Leave nothing but rubble for them. So what they were doing was, as the Russians were retreating deeper into Russia, and you're going to notice this a lot in Russian history, their best tactic is just to keep retreating. It's pretty much war of attrition. The further they get into Russia, the better, because you're cutting them off from their supplies and you're straining their supplies. So, the closer they are to Sweden, the more continuous they're getting supplies, but their lines are getting dwindled as they make their way into Russia. So that was another reason the battle was pretty much forced, because Charles XII was running out of supplies, and he's like, I need to beat them so I can, one, get their supplies, and two, just end this war. this is another really interesting thing. You know, when we are talking about this era in warfare, you know, our recent most of our this channel I mainly do cover the American Civil War, which is where we pretty much see the end of this style of fighting. But this is where we actually are seeing it being mainstream. Like, this is the linear style. Most of us probably know this as Napoleonic, but it's actually linear fighting. So the way it works is, you know, you have a regiment, one line, 2 ranks deep. This will change under Napoleon, where Napoleon will have about 20 ranks deep, but we'll talk about that at a later time. And you march at each other, you fire at each other, and then once you're done firing, with bayonets on, you go into hand-to-hand combat. Now, the Caroleans were fantastic at this fighting style. This is what had made Charles XII such an effective commander. His men were so disciplined and drilled, they knew how to perform in this way. And this is how he actually beat both Russia, Poland, and Denmark. But what ended up being his downfall was, while he was fighting Denmark and Poland, Peter the Great realized, I need to start fighting this way too. I need to start mainstreaming and drilling my men, because, again, the Russian army is mainly conscripts, the same as it is today. But he started drilling them and teaching them how to fight better and how to hand-to-hand combat and everything. So that's what we're seeing here, is this linear way of fighting. So right there, King Carolus had to flee. What ended up happening was, when the battle started turning against the Swedish army, Charles XII was like, I can't be here. Now, in the beginning, you probably noticed he was sitting in a chair. That was because he had hurt himself early in the campaign and wasn't actually able to walk or ride or anything. So he had to be pretty much carried around in the sofa thing. So what ended up happening was, when the Russian advance came and they were pushing the Swedish back, the Carolingian generals threw him on a wagon and got him out of there, because if he was captured, all was lost, and the war was definitely going to be lost. So that's what that term, King Carolus had to flee, is referring to. So, yeah, that Poltava, pretty much, it turned the tides of the war. So what ended up actually happening with Charles XII, he actually fled to the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire, let's get off that because it's a giant death scream. The Ottoman Empire was the hereditary enemy of Russia. So he fled to the Ottoman Empire and pretty much took advantage of his host. He kind of just stayed there. He demanded payment and all this. Meanwhile, Peter had actually marched his entire army to the Ottoman border and said, give us him or else. But Poltava would be what pretty much brought an end to the Carolean successes as Charles XII's reign. With the fall of the Swedish army at Poltava, and Carolus, because when how I said about the supplies, he had actually gone so deep to Russia, he was closer to the Ottoman Empire than he was to Sweden. So that's why he fled to Sweden. But this ended the Swedish supremacy during the war. He ended up, and again, I'll do a series on the Great Northern War, but he ended up getting back to Sweden, and he attempted to raise his army again and win the war. And he unfortunately would die during that campaign, kind of under suspicious circumstances. It's actually believed he might have been killed by one of his own guards or one of his own soldiers, because some people say the bullet wound in his head a little too exact for a sniper, and also apparently it's a little too local of a wound. It looks as if someone may have been like right next to him when they shot him. But Peter the Great, on the other hand, he would found Russia as a great European power, making them a superpower. It's after the Great Northern War that the courts of Europe would actually say, well, what's Russia going to do in this scenario? What about the Russians? What about that? And that's something that will continue to this day. Before this, it was Ivan the Terrible who made Russia into a great power, but it was Peter the Great that made him a world power. I mean, made Russia a world power. And the victory of Poltava, not only that, it made him a strategic genius. After this, after the end of the Great Northern War, he will found a new Russian capital, Petrograd, which he named St. Petersburg. Petersburg. Are you really an emperor if you're not a narcissist? But this is a great song. This is what I love about Sabaton. They always pick these interesting tales. And again, this album is all about him. It's all about Carolus Rex. It even talks about his death. It talks about how he rose to power. It talks about his guard, the royal guards, which exists today. He would also be one of the reasons that the Swedish monarchy would suffer greatly until the rise of Bernadotte dynasty under Count Bernadotte, who was actually French. He was one of Napoleon Bonaparte's best marshals that the Swedish people asked to become their new king. And that's actually what the line today is descended from, Count Bernadotte. But Peter the Great was able to found a great empire based on that. And that's what's great about Sabaton, is even though you're really not learning, they're not saying a lot, you learn immensely about it. You learn about how they pushed through Russia, how they defeated the Russians up until this point, but then how this great army was defeated and forced to retreat. And always love listening to that. So thanks again for joining us today for this, friends. I love doing these reaction videos. I'm going to keep doing them along with our original content and our tier lists and things like that. If you're new to the channel, I really hope I earned your subscription. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're returning, please like, share, and comment. And again, tell me a Sabaton song you like and you'd like me to do a little review and talk through. Thank you so much for joining us, friends, and we'll see you in the next one.